Do you notice something? That every time you go out, you see that cars are getting bigger and bigger, becoming heavier, longer and wider. That the sales of these large vehicles are increasing all over the world, even in developing countries. Despite being more expensive, we see thousands of articles on why to buy a pickup or an SUV. It's a global trend that doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. Today, we'll discover why these heavy vehicles are a danger, how they came to be, making us see more of them than regular cars, lighter ones, and the harm that they cause not only to pedestrians, but also to other drivers, as well as to cities and to the world. So let's take a look at why pickups and SUVs are so popular and so ridiculous. 30 or 40 years ago, barely anyone drove an SUV or a pickup truck. They were seen as tools for rural areas, farms, or people who genuinely needed them for work. If a family in a city or a suburb had one, it stood out. Most people drove sedans, wagons, or the occasional minivan. Yet today, in the US, over 80% of new vehicles sold are SUVs or pickups. So what exactly changed? It wasn't demand that shifted first, it was regulation. In 1973, the US introduced the CAFE fuel efficiency standards in response to the oil crisis. This rule aimed to reduce fuel consumption by requiring automakers to improve efficiency, but there was a catch. So-called light trucks, which included pickups and later SUVs, were either exempt or subject to weaker standards, because at the time they were rare and considered work vehicles. The idea was to protect farmers, construction workers, and tradespeople who needed big vehicles for practical purposes. Car manufacturers saw an opportunity and ran with it. They realized they could make larger vehicles with worse fuel economy and weaker safety requirements and still legally sell them. So they began pushing SUVs and pickup trucks not to workers but to regular families. They started advertising them as family-friendly, lifestyle-enhancing, and most of all, safer. This last point, safety, was a key part of the marketing. Protect your family, the ads said. Drive above the danger. The elevated seating and heavy weight made people feel like they were in control. What they didn't mention was that this so-called safety came at the expense of everyone else. When an SUV hits a pedestrian, that person is up to 3 times more likely to die than if hit by a regular car. When a regular car hits you, the impact will go to the legs, and you will likely end up falling into the hood of the car, which is of course bad, but not the worst. The tall front end of an SUV tends to hit people in the chest or head, not the legs, and the stiff frames don't absorb impact very well. For children, it's even worse. Since the rise of SUVs and pickup trucks, there has been a massive increase in what are called frontovers, incidents where a shorter person, often a child, is run over by a driver who simply cannot see them. This chart shows that in just a 10-year span, over 570 children in the US alone were killed after being hit by SUVs, often by their own parents, in their own driveways. In any reasonable society, this will be more than enough reason to regulate and redesign the front end of these vehicles. But instead, manufacturers have responded with proximity sensors and front-facing cameras. The logical solution would be for drivers to have a clear view of the street ahead, not rely on a screen inside the car. But that doesn't seem to be the approach automakers are taking. And they are not just dangerous to people on foot. Their size, stiffness, and weight make crashes more deadly for other drivers too. A small car might protect its occupants well in a crash with another small car, but not when it's rammed by a 2.5-ton pickup truck with a steel frame and poorly designed crumple zones. Despite the off-road image, most of these vehicles never go off-road. Most owners don't tow anything, they don't carry heavy loads and don't drive on rough terrain. What they do is carry a lot of dead space, high fuel bills, and difficult parking experiences. Many of the most popular SUVs, like the Ford Explorer or Toyota Fortuner, are actually way less spacious inside than a compact van like a Renault Kangoo or even a small hatchback with the seats folded down. But the automakers don't care about space or practicality. What matters to them is profit. A large SUV or a pickup truck costs more to buy, but it doesn't cost that much more to make. That's a big profit margin. And since regulations are looser for light trucks, it's even easier and cheaper to design them. So now, almost all new vehicles on the market are oversized. Even small cars are being phased out, not because they don't sell, but because they aren't as profitable. In many countries, you literally can't even buy a compact wagon or a hatchback anymore. Entire categories of efficient, affordable vehicles have vanished. Meanwhile, the external costs are growing. SUVs are the second largest driver of global CO2 increases since 2010, more than entire countries. They take up more space, block sight lanes, and make traffic worse. They are harder to park, especially in older cities with narrower streets. They have contributed to a rise in pedestrian and cycling deaths in many countries, even as overall traffic deaths were going down. The all-wheel drive myth adds to the confusion. People buy SUVs thinking that they are safer in bad weather, but that's misleading. All-wheel drive helps you accelerate in snow or mud, sure, but it doesn't help you stop or turn any better. In fact, SUVs often have worse handling and longer braking distances because of their weight and high ground clearance, especially in wet or icy conditions. One of the most dangerous things about SUVs is their ground clearance. Cars made in North America are required to have a bumper between 40 and 50 centimeters from the ground, or about 16 to 20 inches from the ground. But this is not the case for pickup trucks, which don't have this regulation. But the much higher bumper of an SUV means that in a collision, the impact hits the torso, which we all know is far more deadly. And if you're hit by an SUV, you're more likely to be thrown to the ground and strike your head. This makes it much more likely for your body to end up underneath the vehicle. And yes, having your body go under a moving vehicle is pretty much the worst that can happen. But who is actually buying these vehicles? Automakers like to portray SUV owners as adventurous, outdoorsy types, but internal industry studies often paint a different picture. SUV and pickup buyers tend to score higher on measures of anxiety, impulsiveness, and risk aversion. In other words, they are often buying these vehicles out of fear. Fear for their family's safety, fear of other drivers, fear of being in the smaller car in a crash. So it becomes an arms race. You buy a bigger vehicle to protect yourself from other big vehicles, and in doing so, you make the road even more dangerous for everyone else. Meanwhile, these vehicles don't actually offer the practicality people often assume. Many of the most popular SUVs are less spacious inside than a small hatchback with the seats folded down. The monstrous Cadillac Escalade has a cargo capacity of 0.7 cubic meters, which is 4 times less than a Renault Kangoo, which has 3 cubic meters. And yes, even I was surprised to see that such a monstrously large SUV has such a small cargo capacity. Ironically, many people buy these vehicles thinking they are powerful workhorses, but few ever use them that way. Most people never tow anything, and when they do, they are doing it rarely. In contrast, in places like Europe, you will see compact vans or even small hatchbacks towing campers, trailers, or boats, safely and legally of course, with a vehicle that has a very low torque and horsepower. You could already tow a relatively heavy load, that is, at least a place where you can sleep. There are quite extreme examples here, but they prove a point. You do not need 500 horsepower and 700 Newton meters to tow a caravan. But the truth is, most families would do better off with a station wagon or a state car for the UK, lower to the ground, easier to load, more efficient, safer for pedestrians, and more often than not, with more cargo space than a mid-size SUV. Wagons have nearly vanished in many markets, not because they failed, but because regulations and marketing worked against them. We don't need to all drive tiny cars, but we do need to recognize that lighter vehicles, built with fewer materials, consuming less fuels, and taking up less space are much better for cities, better for people, and better for the planet. A vehicle that weighs 1100 kilograms instead of 2700 kilograms doesn't just emit less carbon, it also uses less steel, less plastic, fewer rare minerals, and causes less tire and brake pollution. It is better in every measurable way except one: profit margin. Did people really actually change that much? 40 years ago, the top-selling car in America was the tiny Ford Escort. Today, it's the Ford F-150, a pickup that is so big it barely fits in a standard parking space. Is that really because people's needs have changed? Or is it because the auto industry reshaped the market to avoid regulations and maximize profits? This was not a natural evolution. It was the result of deliberate political, regulatory, and corporate choices that shifted costs onto the public. Costs in the form of more pollution, more road deaths. SUV lovers like to say that their modern SUVs are much more efficient than the old models. But this comes from technological improvements, and we cannot escape physics. A large and heavier SUV, even with great technology, will always consume more fuel or energy than a lighter car with equally good technology. That's why a semi-truck carrying over 20 tons will consume around 25 liters per 100 kilometers, while a 3-ton Ford Raptor will consume around 10 liters per 100 kilometers. More mass requires more energy, even though trucks are often much more efficient than pickup trucks, despite the massive loads they carry. It's pretty clear that in places where people use their vehicle for work, meaning they need a lot of space on a daily basis, cargo vans are a very common choice. A typical European van can easily carry more than a pickup truck, and obviously far more than an SUV. Plus, their lower height off the ground makes loading and unloading much easier. And yes, these vans can get quite large, but that space is used efficiently for hauling things. Despite having more total volume than most pickups, they still tend to be lighter overall. So, what's the solution? We can start by closing the light truck loophole. Regulate all vehicles equally, based on their actual weight, emissions, and crash performance, not their marketing category. We can tax vehicles based on size and weight, as many European countries do. We can reward efficient and space-saving vehicles, and fund better public transit, bike infrastructure, and walkable cities. This isn't about banning SUVs, it's about stopping the policies that artificially favor them. If people truly need a large vehicle, they will still have options, but those vehicles should meet the same standards as everything else on the road. We don't need more steel, more mass, more marketing. We need better choices, smarter policies, and safer streets for everyone.